Well, to unpack the impact of this peace mission being led by African heads of state as well as government, we join in studio by international news editor Sophie Mokoena. Thank you so much for making time for us. The president describing it as impactful. Some are saying that to measure the success, it will take some time, and I think that that's what the president expressed as well. But just quickly before we go into the nitty-gritties of what was discussed here, is the difficulty and the complexities of when it comes to these negotiations, which Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka also touched on a bit.
Yes, indeed, because you have to have a particular skill to ensure that you are able to start the process. As the president pointed out, that word impactful speaks to, he can't say successful, because you can only measure the success when there's movement between the two leaders. But what we saw weekend, starting in Ukraine, as the ambassador pointed out, there were those reports of the sirens, which is a sign that somewhere in that country attacks were continuing. Two, the Ukraine insisting that Russia must completely withdraw. When you reach Russia, you have President Putin even getting impatient with the presentation, pulling out that report to say we were far. And this was negotiated by the Turkish, the president of Turkey. We had some of us signed the documents, and they were supposed to meet with Zelensky. But then there was this and about 10. And therefore, him saying, don't blame me. Secondly, the fact that late yesterday, there were reports that he is not willing to extend the grain agreement. And you know that the UN Secretary General is worried about that agreement, which is about to come to an end, and Africa will be affected. Therefore, you can see that they are still sticky.
Was that agreement not brokered by Turkey as well?
It was brokered by Turkey. So
now we know that Vladimir Putin will be going to Turkey again.
Yes, that grain agreement, it was brokered by Turkey and the United Nations. You remember we took the signing of the agreement live here on SABC. Now, he is going to Turkey again. And therefore, you can see that Turkey had started the process. China did the same by sending envoys in Russia and in Ukraine with the 12-point plan. And now you have African leaders with 10-point plan. And when you listen to what the former South African president is saying, he's literally saying, hang on, wait with the 10-point plan. Go and listen. And then come back, and then you can come up with a clear way forward. Because unless you listen to both parties, you might come up with something that's not going to work. And already we've seen the objection to some of the points within that presentation. And therefore, the second issue is, how do you silence the guns? And perhaps let's take a listen at what the former South African President Thabo Mbeki had to say in terms of how you mediate, based on the fact that South Africa has got vast experience since 1994 to mediate in different parts of the continent and the world. Lockerbie and Ireland, where the President Ramaphosa was involved. Let's take a listen at how Mbeki described processes of mediation or intervention.
The way we approach the solution of conflicts on the continent, it doesn't matter which country is involved. We always say, let's stop the guns firing and let's sit down. Then we can then discuss the causes of the war and so on in order to find a solution. The African presidents are taking the same position that they would take. They are taking with regard to Ukraine, the same position that we take with regard to the continent. So if you want to be a mediator, you can't start by condemning one side or the other. You've got to say, first of all, let's sit down. Silence the guns, let's talk. It's during the negotiations that then you can say, you were wrong, you were right. You can't start there. So this neutral position in that sense is correct.
On this, because when you look at the 10-point plan that came from the African heads of state as well as government, which Lavrov had said that some of the points actually mirror what Xi Jinping was trying to achieve with his plan, where to from here?
I think when they arrive back on the continent, as they have right now, the best thing will be to appoint very high-profile people. It can be in a form of former heads of state and government, or very high-profile former foreign affairs ministers or diplomats, to go back and get more information, and then they can work on a document that they can present. That document must be in sync with what China is saying, what Turkey is saying, accommodate what the West are saying, because then you will have Ukraine buy-in. And from there, at the AU heads of state and government meeting, they must thoroughly discuss that document so that you then prepare a process where again you will then send your high-profile people, because you don't want to expose heads of state and government, leaders of countries, to this, back and forth, and they look like they don't even speak in one voice, which is true. We know where Zambia stands. We know where Comoros stand, and we know South Africa has been firm on the non-aligned position, and therefore then you can be able to make headways.
One of the things that actually played out during the was it the Saturday press briefing with the President Volodymyr Zelensky, or was it Friday? Friday or Saturday, was what was said by the AU chairperson, and also listening to what the President said during the meeting with President Putin. He says that on behalf of African states, do we know whether all African states have actually given the green light for this mission?
That's what's being said, but we don't know unless there's an African summit, and they are all there, 55 member countries, even though some might send representatives. It's only then we can really say, and that is why I'm saying the mid-term meeting of the African Union, every year between June, July, you have this mid-term meeting of heads of state and government. That meeting must prioritize these discussions so that there's a buy-in, and Africa is speaking in one voice. And therefore, you saw when they were responding, the issue of Ukraine taking them where they were, where they had those lamps. For Russia, it was a no, because this is the area that is controversial in relation to Russia's position. And as you pointed out to the ambassador, this is the issue of ICC as well. And you know how Russia feels about the ICC matter. And therefore, that's why you have to be very, very strategic.
How does it then play out in the court of public opinion? And I remember with Kenya as well, before they were going into their 2017 elections, the issue that was raised there was that having a warrant of arrest out for President Kenyatta as well as William Ruto at the time will muddy the waters. I think President Thabo Mbeki had explained it the same way as well. So now we know of the children that have been abducted, and as part of the 10-point plan that has been presented is the return of these children. But the issue around the warrant of arrest itself, some analysts are saying that if there is an expectation that South Africa must still execute this warrant of arrest, it just muddies the waters.
Well, of course, and let me make it clear, there is no way the ICC is going to withdraw that warrant of arrest. You would recall that during al-Bashir, the former South African president, who is still involved in the Sudan question, made an appeal that please suspend, not completely do away with it, suspend implementation of this warrant of arrest. Because if you continue with this threat, you are making negotiations in Sudan very difficult. They didn't listen. Where is Sudan today? Where is Sudan today? And now there's a glimmer of hope, because he's saying he spoke to William Ruto, and IGAD is beginning to have some way in ensuring that all stakeholders are on board. But as long as you have that warrant of arrest, it's a problem. And I can tell you, Aldrin, there is no way the ICC is going to make an about 10. We know that even South Africa has sent officials to the International Criminal Court at The Hague to try and persuade the ICC to park or suspend or to rescind the warrant of arrest. But nothing is happening. We're counting how many months to BRICS summit? Only 1 month, July. I don't even count June.
Final one is on what happened in Poland, the logistical nightmare that it was. I spoke to the ambassador of Ukraine a bit earlier on as well, and she is behind the statement that was issued by the Polish government that there were weapons that were not declared, that were not supposed to be part of this mission, and there were persons as well that were not supposed to be part of this mission. How does it then play out in the court of public opinion? Because we know what happened after the US ambassador to South Africa, Brickety, had mentioned that South Africa had supplied arms to Russia.
I hope the officials are telling the truth, that all papers were in order and they had declared all the cargo, including the equipment that was carried by journalists. You have traveled on the continent and outside South Africa, even coming back to South Africa. When you have a particular equipment, you have to declare. And if you don't, it gets confiscated. How many times we've lost equipment here because there was no carnet, there was no this. Now, when coming to war machinery and or arms, it gets even more complicated. It is not the first time the sitting South African head of state visit a war zone. I traveled to Ivory Coast. The president visited Ivory Coast at that time, Thabo Mbeki. It was bad, but there was proper communication and his security was guaranteed. Everything was above board. Two, you didn't have a problem of the airspace because it was the African continent. So African countries didn't have a problem. The other example, Libya, when the former president of South Africa, Jacob Zuma, was appointed to lead the African Union mission to Libya to negotiate with Gaddafi. You know what happened. Yeah. You know what happened. He also had a very strong security, but there were no problems too. At that time, when he was in Libya, NATO attacked. So these things are not new, but if you do away with institutional memory, you will make mistake. And I believe what the former the current Secretary General of the ANC, Fikile Mbalula, said to me yesterday when he said there must always be continuity and learning of lesson from the previous leader to the next leader. These are some of the things. South Africa has got capacity. The former ambassadors who were involved in these processes can share information. The former presidents who were involved can share, the former deputy presidents. And I think what we need to do as a country is just to ensure that we use all our strength and capacity that we have, and we do have it in abundance.
A quick final one, just briefly though. NATO, the summit is happening next month. Expectation, of course, the Secretary General of NATO has said it will also be an attempt to bring Ukraine closer to NATO. Biden has said that Ukraine would have to meet the minimum criteria. We don't know whether it will be able to meet the minimum criteria. The ambassador saying to us that it's still on the table. They still want to join NATO. Does it make negotiations even more difficult considering why we ended up with this war?
There can be a compromise, and it's good. You'd recall when I did an interview with the president of Finland when he was in the country explaining why Finland joined NATO. He said what could assist the world at this moment, because the world is drifting apart, is when America and China can have a better relationship, being a number one and the second largest economy, powerful nations, and they can broker peace. Therefore, you know that Ukraine will listen to the Americans and EU member countries and NATO. Yeah. You know that Russia will listen to the South, including the African heads of state and China. And therefore, the more you have a better relationship between China and America, the better for the world. And I'm hoping that the meeting at 11:30 South African time will see those visuals of President Xi Jinping meeting Blinken, which will prepare or pave way for meeting of Biden and Xi Jinping, perhaps on the margins of the UNGA, the United Nations General Assembly in September, and that will be followed by the G20 meeting in India. And therefore, it get America and China talking. and you will find a way to solve some of the problems that we have currently as the world is drifting apart. But you will be linking to that should we have a feed on time.
Thank you so much, Sophie Mokoena, there, our international news editor, and also, as she's just indicated now, that there will be that meeting that will be taking place between Xi Jinping as well as Blinken. If we do have that footage, we'll bring you those visuals live.